Hello and welcome. Thanks for joining us this morning. Talk a little bit of trout fishing in Oklahoma using bait. We have our seasonal trout fisheries that are well underway. We're about a month into stocking on those. So, really good time of year to get out, be trout fishing. There's more trout in those bodies of water than there were a month ago with some additional stocking. So, really good time to get out and try your hand at some trout fishing. Really the easiest way to trout fish at most bodies of water around the state are going to be utilizing bait. Trout in ponds and in lakes and in some of the creeks that we stock them in that don't really have a whole lot of flow. Um, those trout are just going to kind of be cruising shoreline and looking for easy meals. And bait is kind of your number one way to get to them. So there's not a whole lot that goes into bait fishing for trout. Your options are fairly limited. It's mostly going to be utilizing some type of dough bait, whether that be like a dough paste, like a power ball or power bait, salmon eggs or marshmallows, things that are packaged as trout pellets, but they're all kind of the same, just a scented dough that you're wrapping around a really small hook. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of show your most basic setups of how to achieve that, what you're looking for anywhere where you go fishing. Um, while the setup is going to be fairly similar, no matter how you do it, there's a few different ways that you can rig it up that have their own benefits, either for catching the fish or for you as the angler. So we're just going to go kind of step by step through that. So first, I'm just going to show kind of what your general bait options are if you were to go to any type of fishing store, whether it be a big box chain or you're in a trout area that the Walmart or the local bait and tackle shop is going to have trout equipment. This is what you're more than likely going to see. Your most common bait that's going to be out there is going to be your Berkeley power bait. These are going to come in a ton of different colors. Most common ones are going to be like this bright green that's got the flash in it. Some of them you're going to see on the labeling. Some of them will say natural scent. Some of them will say extra scent. It's all a lot of the same. Nymph, purple. This is going to be kind of more of what's marketed as a natural scent in the water. But lots and lots of different colors, rainbows and tans and oranges. They come in all different types of colors. It really just kind of comes down to each angler finds something that works probably one time somewhere, uses it again, continues to use that type of bait. And that's really all fishing is. It's just finding confidence with different types of baits and lures that you have and finding something that works best for you and then being able to replicate that over and over again. Other things that you're going to see that aren't going to come in the paste form, but are going to come in more of like a pellet, are going to be something like these gulp salmon eggs. They're going to come in some different colors, might have different flavors that are labeled on there. The big thing with all of these types of dough baits, marshmallow, this one's labeled as garlic, cheese. There's one labeled as shrimp that you can use. The big thing with all of these is that they float. So what we're doing is we're fishing off the bottom with a really small hook, some type of sinking weight, maybe a swivel, and you're allowing the power bait or the dough or the pellet, whatever it may be, you're using such a small light hook that what it's doing is it's floating it up off the bottom, keeping it somewhere between probably anywhere from 6 to 2 feet off the bottom, just depending on how you want to rig it. And that's kind of going to be your strike zone of where these fish are going to be located. If you were in a river that had some flow, you're looking at areas where you can hold the bottom, which are going to be like back eddies, or maybe sitting on top of a waterfall or some type of downstream where you can be in the middle of the river and casting straight downstream so that you can hold your weight on the bottom and keep it in the strike zone. But those are your main kind of baits that you're going to see. Now you can use other types of baits. I mean, you could use little marshmallows from the grocery store. You could use kernels of corn, either out of a can or out of out of a bag. You could use worms, red worms, night crawlers, but typically power bait is going to be your most effective bait fishing bait that you're going to use. And didn't mention it at the beginning, but feel free to use the chat bar to ask questions at any time. If I went too fast through something or you have a question, use that. These are meant to be conversational. So with that, I'm going to jump right into our different rigging setup. So what do you need to go trout fishing? Whether you're using an open face spinning setup or you're using a spin casting, you may even be using a bait casting setup. But most of the time, if you're going to be fishing with power bait, you're going to be using some type of just basic medium light to medium action spin casting or spinning rod and reel combo is what you're looking for. Size of your rod really isn't that important. You know, you could be 5-foot rod all the way up to a 7.5-foot rod, somewhere in there. But for fishing with bait, you're really looking for like a medium light to medium action rod. It's sensitive enough at the tip of the rod that you're going to be able to indicate bites. And it also has enough of a backbone that you're going to be able to set the hook. Because depending on which way you rig your bait setup, is going to kind of determine how much backbone you need when you ultimately go to set that hook. Now, most of the hooks that we're using are very small, thin wire, very sharp hooks. So all you're really doing is you're pulling that hook, you're in the hook set through your power bait, it's hitting the fish in the roof of the mouth, and you're reeling it in. So got our line here. Line, you know, is not that important. You're looking for something between 2 and 8 pounds. Now, in most bodies of water that you're trout fishing, you're probably going to be dealing with some clearer water. So braid might not be your best bet to use. The fish are going to be able to see it. And for fishing off the bottom, fluorocarbon, which is a sinking line, also isn't ideal unless you're just using it as your main line with the leader line. So ideally what you're looking for with the trout setup is something in probably the 4 to 6 pound range. 6 is a really good happy medium line. Something just monofilament. So just this is what I'm going to be using to tie. I got my main line off of our fishing rod that we're going to use. And then I'm going to use this for any type of leader that I use. But 6 pound monofilament is really going to be your best bet for multi-purpose trout fishing. It floats when it's in the water. So if you're using weight off the bottom and you're using your own line as your leader, you know it's going to float up. If you're using fluorocarbon or braided line or fluorocarbon line, you're going to get some sinkage, and then braided line, you're going to have some visibility with it. So, but you are going to find success with any type of line that you use, but really with trout fishing, it's more on the lighter end of tackle. So what you need to set up for a basic bottom rig is some type of weight. So I like to use casting weights, little plum weights. You're going to see them. They come in some package that looks like this, but essentially it's a teardrop shaped weight that has a eye hole on it, and it sits like this. So what we're going to do for our first setup is all you're going to do is you're going to take the main line that's coming off of your fishing rod, and you're going to take your casting weight. 1/8 ounce is usually enough. So if you're fishing still water, pond, lake, not much wind, 1/8 of an ounce is plenty. That's going to be able to cast you as far as you want. And it's not going to be too heavy. I'll go all the way up to 1/4 ounce if it's really windy or if I need to hold current. Anything more than that is probably not going to be as effective because the fish are going to be able to feel that heavy weight. So we have on our main line right here. So now we have a couple of different options how we want to proceed from here with this first setup. You can use your straight line. If you have monofilament line that's spooled onto your fishing rod, just put your weight on like this. This is going to be the easiest way to do it, and get yourself, let's find some hooks, some real small trout hooks, something that's going to be size 8 or smaller. So size 8, size 10, size 12, maybe in size 14. You can use a treble hook, or you can use what is usually labeled as a salmon egg hook. So this is what our salmon egg hook looks like. Very small. Our eye hole is almost even with the hook point. And you can put power bait on this, or you can put a pellet, or you can put a salmon egg, whatever you want to use. Or you can use a really small treble hook, like a size 14. If you're using treble hooks, the one thing that you're going to run into is not a problem unless you're planning on releasing fish. If you're going to be releasing fish, treble hooks, excuse me, if you're using treble hooks, there's a higher rate of the fish mortality. So sticking with something like this, you can even debarb that. And in some places like the lower mountain fork or the Blue River catch and release zone, you would have to get rid of the barb on that hook by pinching it down. So we've got our sliding casting weight on our main line, and we have the end of our line right here. So you're just going to attach your hook to your main line with whatever fishing knot you like to tie. Usually with these smaller hooks, the eye hole is so small that doubling it over for a Palomar knot can be a little bit trickier. So just some type of fishing knot, usually improved clinch knot is going to be plenty. And we'll get this tied on. And the next step is what is the most favorable for these. So with this, take your tag end, clip that off, leave just a little bit on just in case you didn't get that knot cinched down. So it's got some room for slippage. Now, the great thing about a setup like this, using just a monofilament line, is you can adjust how far you want to be off the bottom with this. So we're not using a snelled knot. We don't have a swivel. Nothing is affecting our depth. So what we're going to do is we want to take a very small piece of split shot, real small. You want something that is as small as you can go, that is just big enough that the hole of your casting sinker can't slide over the top of it. And what you'll do is you'll take this piece of split shot and you're going to affix it to your line. Typically a foot to like 18 inches is plenty. You could go lower if there's not a lot of bottom vegetation. And we crimp that to the line, and then you're going to want to take some pliers once you're set up, and you're going to want to really crunch that down so it's not moving up and down the line on you. And this is very, very light, so not much to it. So the benefit of this, so now we have our stopper on our line, and we have our hook, and we're about 12, 14 inches to where this is going to float off the bottom. So when you cast this straight out and this goes to the bottom, you're going to reel up your line. So it's going to land something like this, and you're going to reel up your line until that hits this, and you're going to start to feel tension. And what you're looking to create is a tight line at the end of your rod tip. So as you're reeling up and you have this slack, you want to keep reeling, keep reeling, keep reeling until it's tight, just like this. Maybe even with the slight bend in it. That means you've got good contact with the bottom. Now, the reason that we have this casting weight and this small piece of split shot is that when it's fixed on the bottom like this, your power bait or your salmon egg or whatever you're using that's floating, it's going to take your line and it's going to stand up just like this. So when that fish comes, no matter what direction it bites from, if it's biting directly at you, if it's biting sideways, if it's biting away from you, what it's going to allow your line to do is slide through that. So the tip of your rod is going to indicate that bite either through some type of thump or just a release. So if it's tight like this and that fish is hitting it in most directions, your bite's going to look something like this. But if it's tight like this, and then all of a sudden it releases into slack, like that, a fish hit it coming at you, that's also going to indicate your bite. But the big thing with trout and a lot of fish, when you're using some type of bottom bouncing, is they can feel the tension of that weight. So if you have your weight affixed to something, let's say you have it fixed to something like a snap swivel, which is, you can use that as well. When they go to pick it up, they're going to bite, and then they're going to feel that kind of, kickback from that bait. And that could be enough on a trout where it comes up and it likes to peck on that power bait. That could be enough for it to decide, I no longer want to pursue that bait. Because unlike, your bass or your catfish, that's going to come when you're bait fishing and it's pretty much just going to inhale that bait and it's just going to run with it, where you as the angler are just making sure you get to your rod before it ends up in the water. Trout are going to take more of kind of a peck approach at it, where they come up, they hit that bait. They have conal shaped mouths like this, as opposed to our sunfish species that expand to inhale bait in. So they're actually forced to, physically go and bite that bait. So by allowing that casting weight to slip through with your line, that's going to be, your stealthiest approach at rigging off of the bottom. So let's just show real quickly what we would do with that hook with any of these baits. So if we were going to use our power bait, and again, this is a pretty small hook. This is going to be a size 10 salmon egg hook. You could go smaller. You could go all the way down to 14, 16. Those are really small. But if we're using our power bait paste like this, all you're doing is just going and getting a fingertip sized daub, something like that, just enough to cover your fingertip. And you're going to take that hook point just like that, press it up against one side of the hook, and then just form a ball, little teardrop around that hook. We want just enough bait on here to cover our hook. We don't want a huge glob, because what's going to happen is that fish is going to come over, and obviously the smaller that it is, the easier it is to get it all the way in the fish's mouth. But when we go to set the hook, we're essentially just pulling that power bait right off of that hook, just like that, when you go to set the hook. So it's going to rip right through it. So you're going to get a quintessential thump, thump, thump. You're going to be reeling, getting rid of your slack, making sure you feel that tension, and then you just hammer that hook point back. But the big thing with using the paste power bait is not using too much. So if you were to, go in there and get a huge dollop on your hand and put that around and end up looking something like this, where it's like the size of, the end of your finger, that fish is going to come and it's going to, peck, 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 and it's going to start pulling that bait off of that hook, just like this. And each of those bites, when you go to pull that hook point through, there might be too much on it when it's in its mouth. You go like that, fish gets the power bait, you come back with the hook that looks something like that. So that's going to be your biggest, most common mistake when using paste. Something that's like this, where it's not a pre-formed salmon egg or marshmallow or pellet that you can wrap around or physically affix to the hook point. But you have to wrap it around. You're just getting enough to cover that hook point. Same thing goes if you're using a treble hook. If you're looking to keep fish, if you're going trout fishing to keep them, go with the treble hook. It's going to greatly increase your hookup rate. But if you're just going out, you just want to catch some fish, catch and release, going with a small salmon hook, something, mosquito hook, an octopus hook, just anything that you can use that is going to be small, single point, and you can even take it a step farther, and probably won't show up on that webcam, but that little tiny barb that's right there. These thin wire hooks, just a decent pair of pliers. You just grab it like that, give it a real good squeeze down, and you can get that barb pinched down pretty good. Um, Forceps will work as well, but that's going to increase the fish's survival rate if you're looking to just release the fish and you don't want to accidentally have to cull them or keep them. But if you do, stick with the treble hook. So that is the essential setup right there. If you just do that and you use any of our dough power bait, different types of salmon eggs, something with the floating marshmallow, something that's going to get up off the bottom that's going to float. And all you're doing is putting any one of these around a hook point. So if it's one of these marshmallows or it's some type of pellet that needs to get affixed, with this, it's in pretty good intact. So you can just put that right over the hook point and then just force the hook all the way inside of it like that. Same thing goes for the salmon eggs. All you're trying to do is just hide that hook. So whether it's a little single point hook or a treble hook, you're just looking to hide it. And these marshmallows or pellets, this is a pretty good size indicator. So if you're unsure of how big of a bait profile to kind of wrap around that hook, like we showed with the dough paste, usually the pellets are a pretty decently sized. They're not too big. So how you fix them? So really, the next thing that comes down to bait fishing for trout, the big things, like I said, increasing your odds for success are going to be things like lighter line, medium light, medium action rods, things that you can have sensitivity with the tip of the rod where you're going to notice any type of subtle bite, keeping good contact with the bottom. 1/8 ounce weight is usually plenty, but if the wind's blowing a little bit and you go to reel up your line and you're noticing that you're having trouble keeping slack out of your line, the biggest thing when you're bottom fishing, once you're out there and you have your rig set up right, is going to be that rod tip. So if your line is just sitting out there and it looks something like this, you're not going to sense bites. You might get lucky, something might really grab it, but more often than not, you're going to miss bites. So super important, keeping that line tight to the rod tip to where your rod, when it's out there nice and taut all the way to the water line, you notice a bite, something like that, or you notice it just kick up like that. And then you're engaging your reel, reeling until you feel a steady thump, pressure, or anything hitting it, and you no longer have slack. That's when you're going to rear back for the hook set. If it knocked it like this, or if it's biting and it's creating slack in the line, and you go to set the hook like this, a lot less likely chance of success. A lot more opportunity for you to pull the hook from the fish's mouth, for that bait to have come off. Just your biggest chance for success is always going to be keeping a real nice tight line, and typically 1/8 of an ounce up to a 1/4 ounce or a 3/16 ounce. That's going to be plenty. And then utilizing a small piece of split shot as your stopper. And the great thing about using split shot is if you feel like maybe you need to get higher up off the bottom, or maybe you're too high up and you want to get lower, you can slide that weight up and down. So you move that and then just crimp it down again so it can't move. And usually after a few casts, it's going to loosen up a little bit. You're going to be able to move it up and down the line. Or you can just pop it off and add a new piece if it's gotten worked over too bad. But that's great for trout fishing with bait, is having the ability to be able to adjust your bait in that zone. If you use things like snelled hooks, something that comes in packs like these, this is usually how you're going to see them. Eagle Claw, big manufacturer. You're going to see snelled hooks. They're going to come in, you can get a value pack like this where you have a few different sizes, size 6 up to 12. Those are all going to be your great kind of perfect trout hooks, finding the size that works best for you. Or you can buy just one size, like an 8 or a 10 are going to be your most common sizes, and they're going to usually come in a 6-pack. The thing about the snelled hooks, which I'll show in a second, for when you go to rig it, that can cause you problems is that you are completely limited to a certain depth if you want to rig it safely. There is a way to attach it to your main line that's a little bit riskier. You can get line breakage, but I'm going to show a couple different ways just with your main line before we move on to using snelled hooks. The nice thing about snelled hooks is that a lot of times it's just hard to find hooks at stores that are that small. You know, you go to a Bass Pro or a Cabela's, they're going to have them, maybe even an Academy or an Atwoods or a Dick's Sporting Good, depending on how big their fishing center is, a Walmart maybe. But if you're going into like local bait and tackle stores, smaller retails, a lot of times you just can't find small hooks in packs. And so what you're left with is the smallest hooks that you can find are ones that are these snelled hooks, which they have their place. They work fine. It's also a good way to fish. But for all intents and purposes, the way we just showed with your casting weight affixed on your main line, monofilament, 4 to 8 pound test with a treble hook or a small salmon egg, octopus, mosquito hook attached to the end of your main line, and then using a piece of split shot to crimp on to determine how much distance you want to be off the bottom, and then using a paste dough bait or some type of salmon egg, marshmallow, trout pellet, whatever you feel comfortable, confident using. I like the dough paste, get pretty good value out of it. Some of the Gulp salmon eggs, you can use these over and over and over again because they're synthetic and they have scent on them. So just really whatever bait you find success with that you want to use. All of these have been tried and true in the trout community all over the world where people fish for trout with bait. I'm just partial to dough paste powered bait because that's how I've done it since I was a kid. Got a lot of confidence in it, but the setup for all of this is identical. So the next way that we could do our set up our bottom bouncing with a casting weight is by taking a swivel. So you have two different options with the swivel. You can use a snap swivel, which is going to be great if you want to use a snelled hook. Or we can use a just regular barrel swivel. Your barrel swivel is probably going to be your better bet if you're looking to do something with like a bullet weight. Or if you have braided line and maybe you're connecting a monofilament leader to your braided line, or maybe a fluorocarbon line and you're connecting a monofilament leader. You can also attach a fluorocarbon leader. It has sinking properties in it. So if your line is heavier than what your marshmallow or your dough bait and your hook is, understand that if you're using fluorocarbon to attach to your hook from the bottom, that it is going to try to fight against floating because it does not have floating properties like a monofilament or a braided line does. So this time we take our main line. So either way, you can use a snap swivel and you can put the weight onto the snap swivel if you wanted to where you had it all set up and you could throw a snelled hook with the loop on this, attach it to your main line, and then close that swivel and you're good to go. The only thing is that when that fish goes to bite, it is going to feel that weight every time. There's no way to get around it. So you could also use a snap swivel for a snelled knot, and we would just put our casting weight on our main line. Then you would take your snap swivel, attach it to the main line, with whatever knot you want to use. Usually with these big eye holes, a Palomar knot goes faster, but you can use a trilene knot, proof clinch knot, uni knot, whatever you're most comfortable with. Um, and we're just going to attach that main line to our swivel. So now what we can do, this is where these snell knots are really handy, because we can go ahead and get one of these out, and it's got this nice loop on it in our hook. But as you can see, we only have about an 8-inch leader. So that means that when we put this onto the snap swivel, so what you do is you take that loop, you have your snap swivel open, put that on like that, close that snap, cut your excess off of your main line that you tied to the swivel. And we have now accomplished the same thing that we did with just the main line, except now you are limited to how far you're fishing off the bottom. So this is going to sit like this when the fish bites. This swivel right here weighs about the same, maybe a tad bit more than our little piece of split shot that we use to affix. So not overly concerned. We're talking like weight that's a 200th of an ounce. So the fish is not going to feel that as much. So when this is sitting on the bottom, it's going to float up like this. Your swivel is going to sit on the bottom with it. And it's just going to raise like that. And that's what it's going to look like on the bottom. And you're going to be about 8 inches up. Most places in Oklahoma that you are fishing, this is going to be perfect. You don't need to be more than 8 inches off the bottom wherever you're fishing at. And this still allows for the fish to bite without feeling that casting weight on the bottom. And you would do everything the same exact way. You cast it out, let it fall to the bottom, close your bail, reel up until you get nice and tight with the tip. And then however you like to trout fish. I typically will use a rod holder of some kind. There's so many options out there. I prefer like either using just a stick where, you have a nice little V and you can put your rod between. They also make the ones that you can actually physically put like the butt of the rod deck into it. I don't like those as much because I got to go get it out of that. I'd rather have the rod on the back of something where I'm pulling up and away without there being any interference of me possibly hitting the rod butt on anything. But completely up to you. You can prop it up against a lawn chair. You can hold on to it if you want. The problem I found with trying to hold on to the rod when you get it set is obviously you're going to have inherent body movement where you could move just the slightest and you're going to cause slack in your line. So good way to avoid keeping the slack out by just having a rod holder when you're out there. But this is going to be this is as basic as it gets. If you don't have, let's say you have braided line or you have fluorocarbon line, all of these all these snells, these are going to be like pretty heavy. They're going to be 10, 12 pound, maybe even 14 pound break strength on these. And they're going to be monofilament. So it's going to float. And that hook, really light, small, thin wire hook, you put any of your power bait or marshmallow, salmon egg, it's going to float just fine. So that is another setup that you can do. And that's where the snap swivel comes in. If you were using a leader line that you're going to tie on yourself to a hook, you probably want to elect for a barrel swivel, just because there's not much of a point of going and tying on to a snap swivel when you're going to use your own leader line. But that would be your setup if you're ever going to use a snelled hook. These are great if you can find these. Nice value pack. Gives you 4 different sizes, 5 different hooks. And you can kind of play around with what hook size you feel most comfortable with and have the most success with. And then you can start buying just that size as a snell, or you can buy, where did that hook go? you can actually just buy the hooks in a pack just by themselves if you know what size you want to use. Um, so let's do this a couple more ways of your bottom setup. Um, the next one is going to be, we can do this two different ways. So we could still use, this is where whatever weight you want to use is kind of up to you. I like these. They sit nicely on the bottom. Got a nice big eye hole where it can move on the line, very unencumbered. The fish is not going to feel it. So I prefer casting weights if I'm trout fishing. But you can use what it's kind of called a Carolina rig, which is using a bullet weight. So something that looks like this. And what you would do is you would take your main line, and you can do this with either or. You could use a casting weight or you could use a bullet weight. I'm going to use the bullet weight on this one. And you would put it through the more narrow side of the bullet weight. Some of them are very pronounced, some of them aren't. This one isn't. Some of them will come to a pretty defined conal tip. So you would put this on your main line. Then you can take a bead, some type of bead, and then put your bead on after you put the bullet weight on, and put that on, and then we would tie on our barrel swivel. So just connect that on. Now this is going to require you to have a hook as well as leader line. You could use leader line by just cutting off a section of your main line before you went through this, holding on to like a 2-foot piece to use. But again, a lot of people are going to take this route for adding a leader line if the main line of their fishing equipment is, not to the specs they want to use for trout, which would be like a 6-pound monofilament. So we've got our main line attached to our swivel with our bullet weight and our bead to keep it off of the swivel head. So look just like this. Then you would take your leader line either off of a spool or something you set aside, and you're going to attach it to the other end of the barrel swivel. So we'll get this affixed on, pop off our tag ends, and then we will affix a hook. So with this also gives you the benefit of choosing what length of leader you want, right? So I'm off of a spool right now. So I can go as long as I want or as short as I want. So you would typically take like 14, 16 inches, somewhere in there, just to get it up off the bottom. Also gives you a little bit of chew line. If you go on kind of the 14-inch side, if you go like 6 or 8 inches a leader, if you're only to give yourself this much, and you snap that hook off, you're more than likely going to have to retie all of your leader line back on. So you go a little bit longer to start, and then you're going to choose between using a treble hook or a little salmon egg hook, octopus hook. But then you would take whatever hook you choose, attach that to the other end of the leader line, tie that on, and then you're going to bait up and you're going to cast out. So all of these setups are the same exact thing. All we're doing is it's basically showing you that depending on what equipment you have laying around, what tackle you have access to, you're going to be able to set yourself up to go trout fishing in almost any situation with what you have. So if you go to a store and they don't have, the exact setup for what we showed on the first go around, that's not going to be a problem, because this right here is not kind of typical of what I grew up trout fishing with, but this is just as effective. You're accomplishing the same thing. And again, this sits down on the bottom like this with this bullet weight. It's going to hit the bottom. You're going to reel up until it gets to there. Then you're going to feel the tension to hold from your rod tip. And then when that fish comes to bite, it's also going to be able to move that line with that swivel without it having the weight attached. So those are going to be your most basic ways to go about getting trout fishing with bait. It just doesn't, there's not really much of a need to go, more than that, because you're going to find a lot of success just using power bait off the bottom. The more fishing that you do, you may want to try different things. There's going to be some other more advanced type rigging systems or bait options that can be used, but this is going to be the easiest way to do it. Now, the one other option that there is on those snelled hooks that I said, where you're kind of limited by the length of that leader line, what you can do, and this is not overly recommended because there is a high fail rate of this knot. But what you can do is you can take your main line. So we got our main line right here, double it over, pull a loop about that far, and you're just going to tie that over. You're just going to wrap that around and just tie a simple overhand knot, like you're tying a balloon or something, to create another loop. So we just want a matching loop. So that's on there. The more knots that you put on fishing line, the more opportunities there are for failure of the knot. That's why I like main line all the way to the hook with just a casting weight and a piece of split shot. That's one knot, one crimp down piece on the line. The least amount of things can go wrong with that. But if you're wanting to create a longer lead line with a swivel to get up off the bottom, what you would do, so now we've created this. This is on our main line. So we want to get a casting weight, and we're going to take the casting weight and we're going to slide it, take our loop right here, and we're going to put that through the eye hole so that we can get that on the main line. So that's on the main line. Now we're going to take our snelled and our main line, and what we're going to do is you're going to take the loop of that snelled hook and you're going to run this loop through it just to where you get it on to the main line. Then you're going to take the hook, you're going to go through the main line loop, and then they're going to join together. So now you have the option with your snelled to determine how far you want to be up off the bottom with that casting weight. So you would just take your piece of split shot and you would choose on that main line how far you want to be up off the bottom. But that right there is 4 different knots in about 12 inches. Any one of those knots could fail, depending on how it was tied. You could tie them perfectly. You could hit a rock. You could hit a stump, stick, anything, get abrasion, pops a knot. So anytime you're fishing, just understand the least amount of knots that you can have on your line, the better off you're going to be with having less opportunity for some type of failure to occur, whether it be line fray, bad knot tie, whatever. So, but that's that kind of goes through all of basically the same exact ways you can fish, with some different just types of equipment that you're going to be able to find. Again, all of this is predicated from fishing off the bottom. Nothing prevents you from taking, let's say, like a weighted jig head or something and sinking your power bait below a bobber. The problem is that with a trout bite, we really want to be off the bottom as opposed to below a bobber, especially on still water. Again, from that pecking and resistance. So it's got to pull a bobber under, which adds resistance. So when the fish comes to hit that hook, it gets resistance, has a tendency to let it go. Having it down on the bottom, allowing for the line to be able to pull, is going to be your best bet. So that kind of covers it. If anybody has any questions, we got about 15 minutes left. I'm going to go over a couple of things that the state of Oklahoma technically considers as bait. You would probably look at this in a store and think there's no way that's bait. It's artificial. But the way that we have the regulations defined for what we consider artificial says that you can't have any type of soft plastic. So that means even if it's not scented, the reasoning behind that rule is there are like Gulp and certain brands that it is a synthetic, but it's impregnated with natural scents. So it's technically considered bait. So that means everything in the soft plastic falls into bait. So if you were to fish at Blue River in the catch and release zone, or you were to fish in the special restrictive zone at the lower Illinois, you would not be able to use what these things are that are technically considered bait, which is going to be any type of soft plastic. So because of that, I'm going to show them as bait. And these are ones that you can actually fish underneath floats, or you can fish them off the bottom, or you can fish them in current. But they're going to be things like trout magnets, which are essentially a little inchworm. They come with like 1/200th size of the jig head and just basic colors like an olive or a chartreuse or a red. These fished underneath some type of small stick float. You could see some effectiveness with that. Also, like a trout worm. So I like using the magnet heads. You can buy these jig heads separately. The ones that come with the soft plastic typically come with like 2 jig heads and like 4 or 5 soft plastic pieces. But you can buy like power bait little worms. And these worms, they come on a string, basically. They're attached. And you just have to take scissors and disconnect them at all of the joints. And then on the thicker side, you would just thread a little jig head onto that. And you can throw these below like a little stick float or a really, really small round float. And you could float these like in a river. Like you could, if you're not in one of those restrictive zones, these are going to work great. Run these about 12 to 16 inches below a float. You could even do a dropper where you attach a piece of line, a leader line, where you would tie it on to the hook shank right here at the bend, and then give yourself about 6 to 8 inches and attach this on. People who fly fish, dropper bugs, that can be really effective in a pond, in a lake, below a float. But I don't consider these bait. I mean, it is a soft plastic, but the regulations consider any type of soft plastic, regardless of if it's synthetic or has natural impregnated scent in it. It's going to be considered not artificial in those 2 special restrictive zones. You could also use a tube, little soft plastic tube, something like this, on like a 1/32 or a 1/64 ounce jig head hook. You could float these below a float. You could cast these out and retrieve them like artificial. But again, things like this would be considered bait in the Blue River in the catch and release zone or the special restrictive zone on the lower Illinois. But those are a couple of options that you have. You can also use things like this in conjunction with a salmon egg. So if you were to take artificial, like a rooster tail, inline spinner, super duper, some type of spoon, or these soft plastics, you can take a salmon egg and affix it to the hook point as well for added. So when you put that on the hook point, it releases that scent and gel that's on the inside that creates the salmon egg smell. So that's just something that you can do to enhance those little trout baits that they make. Anybody have any questions? We got about 10 minutes left. Trying to think if there's really anything else that you need to know. I mean, if you're going to go fishing with bait off the bottom, great. You never been somewhere before. You go into any one of our urban, close to home areas, Edwards Park, Route 66 that are in the Oklahoma City metro, Veterans Park up in Jinx in the Tulsa metro. Those ones, bottom fishing is going to be super effective. They're small bodies of water. They give off a lot of scent. And you're really looking to cast your bait in areas of drop-offs. So if there's shelving or things where there falls off into a channel, you're really looking to just kind of use those ledges. The trout, especially in still water, they just like to cruise those shorelines along those ledges all day long, looking for easy meals. They're kind of out of their natural element. They're stocked. They might be going after natural bug sources that are in the water. There could be bug hatches going on. They're going to feed on small bait fish if they can get a hold of them, insects, invertebrates, and really anything that they can get their hands on in these small bodies of water. Medicine Park tips. Yeah, so Medicine Park water's not really moving. It's basically a stagnant flow between the low water at the bridge and then where the dam coming out of Latonka is at. So you're essentially fishing almost no current. So fishing off the bottom is going to be really easy to hold using a 1/8 ounce weight up to a 1/4 ounce weight. But utilizing any type of these power baits, fishing down, you kind of your best bet around there that I like to use for like power bait. You're going to get your deeper kind of run that's down where the low water is. So where our ODWC hatchery office is at, the stretch of river that's right there just north of the highway bridge. There's a big long run, lots of fish that are going to get stacked up in there. It's going to be a really effective place to utilize bait. Perry Triple C, just north of the Oklahoma City metro. That's another area where you kind of have ledges that fall out into deeper water. And you're looking to just find a piece of shoreline. The great thing about power bait fishing or, bait fishing for trout is that you can be sedentary. So you can take a lawn chair, you can take the family. It's a very relaxing way of fishing. Bringing a rod holder, finding a stick wherever you're at, and just casting straight out. Make some fan casts. If you're not catching fish, if you're not getting bit doing these things, with this type of setup, the first thing you're going to look to do, typically I move first before I start adjusting depth. These fish are pellet raised hatchery fish, so they're very used to going after scented food. So they're going to come looking for that power bait. And the difference between 6 inches off the bottom and 16 inches off the bottom is not really going to make a difference in your success of getting bites. So more than likely, if you're not getting bit utilizing, it's probably not the color of your power bait. If you want to take 2 or 3 and try one of each and see if you're getting bit more on one, you can do that. But more often than not, it's just getting that bait in front of that fish, and that fish is more than likely going to feed. So anytime you go to a place to bait fish, whether it be one of our smaller, slow-moving rivers like the Fushma Line in Robbers Cave or Medicine Creek out at the Medicine Park trout fishing area, even Blue River to some extent, you're going to have some lower flows. The Lower Illinois, the Mountain Fork, they both are going to have more kind of traditional river sections, but there's areas on those bodies of water as well that don't really move that much. And so the big thing with current is always staying upstream. So instead of, If you're fishing from the bank, you don't really want to be casting cross current, because what's going to happen is your line is going to get pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed until it can finally rest. Well, it's probably going to be rested up against the bank a few yards downstream of where you're fishing. So it's always best if you can get completely in the water or in a position where you're casting basically downstream. That way, when the weight falls to the bottom and you're reeling up to take away that slack, your line is straight out and there's not current pushing it in a direction away from you. That's what you're looking to avoid. In still water, the main thing is just which way is the wind blowing. Um, Always trying to position yourself in a way where maybe the wind is at your back, if you can help that. Now, it is counterintuitive because fish ultimately are going to follow, they're usually going to be on the wind driven side of areas because that's where food and bait and everything else is getting pushed to. So, what you're trying to ultimately avoid when you're fishing on still water is crosswind. Just so think of wind just like current. You want it either right at your back or right in your face. But in a stream with current, that's probably not going to work, because if it's coming right at you, it's just going to keep pushing your bait closer and closer to you because you're not going to be able to use enough weight to hold it. So those are really the two things that you're looking for success when it comes to just the elements that are out there. Is don't fish with crosswind. Try to position yourself on a bank where it's either right at your back or right in your face, or if you're on current, you're upstream casting downstream. Your rod, reel equipment, medium to medium light action rods. Those are going to be every starter rod that's out there. So if you're looking to buy a trout fishing setup, or you're getting into fishing and you need a rod, whatever they're selling, basic combo models at any retailer is more than likely going to be a medium or medium light action rod. If you are unsure of what it is, on the rod deck, either on the bottom side or the top side, there's going to be writing on it, and it's going to say at some point what the action is. So it's going to say your action's fast, and then it's going to say power. And that power is going to be right here. And it's either going to say medium, medium light. This is a medium light, a medium heavy. You're looking for a medium or a medium light action rod for bait fishing. If you were artificial lure fishing for trout, you can use a light action rod. Being able to reel and having tension on the rod tip is going to set that hook for you. Whereas with bait, you're having to physically kind of set the hook at a harder motion to move that bait off of the hook. Medium action rod is going to be perfect. Medium light action rod is going to work as well. It's just going to be a little bit more sensitive at the tip, so you're going to have more playing action. You're going to, as you're reeling the fish in, you're going to feel more of that fight with a medium light action rod than a medium action rod. But both have plenty of backbone to actually set the hook. And again, light line, 2-pound test all the way up to 10-pound test, but really 6-pound monofilament is the best like starter line. Now, if you're buying a spin casting combo, odds are it's going to be spooled with 10-pound test. That's fine. You can go all the way out like I did with the first setup and attach a hook and a casting weight and then a swivel with 10-pound test. You're going to catch fish. It's just a little overkill. Most of the fish, because these are not natural fisheries, they are stocked. Most of the trout that are getting stocked are going to be somewhere between 8 and 14 inches. That's not a very big fish. It's going to weigh less than a pound. So 10-pound test is kind of overkill as far as the fight goes, but it's going to work as far practically with setting up your rig. It's going to be fine. Same thing goes for a spinning setup. Most spinning setups, usually you have to spool your own line, but if you buy like a combo set, like a Shakespeare, probably going to have like 8-pound test on it, maybe 10-pound test on it. But 6 pounds is really kind of that perfect line that you're looking for. But if you're more advanced and you really want to kind of, get really finesse, you can go down to 2-pound test. And 8-pound test if maybe you're fishing an area that's got bigger fish. If you're fishing at like a mountain fork or a lower Illinois where those fish are year round, there's more opportunity for there to be a fish over 20 inches. Then all of a sudden, 8 to 10 pound test on a medium action rod is gonna, give you a better chance of landing that fish should you hook into it. But for the most part, all of our fish are going to be at these seasonal areas somewhere under, right around a pound or under, and they're going to be 8 to 14 inches. There will be some bigger fish mixed in, but they're few and far between. And using 2 pound, 4 pound, 6 pound test, medium light action, that's still going to be plenty to get those fish in. But that's kind of the basics of it. I'll throw the if you haven't seen it, our trout angler guide that we have on our website. It's going to list out all the bodies of water where we have trout at, as well as some good information about the areas, campgrounds, where to buy bait and tackle nearby, things that might help you if you want to go take that trout trip this year. Um, my number, if you got the email to join this, then you have my contact information. Always feel free, email, call, text, try to get you set up in the best way that works best for you, for your family, to get out and be able to fish and have success. Because ultimately, with these seasonal trout fisheries, we want you to be able to go out there and, catch as many fish as you can while you're there, and utilizing a bottom rig with an 1/8 ounce to 1/4 ounce weight piece of split shot, small hook, or utilizing a snap swivel and some snelled small hooks. You really don't need to stray farther from that. You can always get on YouTube and search bottom fishing for trout. There's going to be hundreds of videos from different people around the country that fish for trout in their area, who may have their own particular way of doing something. But more than likely, what you're going to find is a lot of videos that are detailing some type of weight, leader, small hook, power bait combo. And how you get there is just really up to what your skills are as an angler and what your comfort level is and what you build confidence in with the baits and the equipment that you're using. And then once you find that, you can pretty much rinse, wash, repeat that really anywhere you go to trout fish, but especially here in Oklahoma year after year. If you had success one year doing one thing, you're going to find that success year after year. And this is really the base starting point when it comes to bait fishing. But if there's keys to keep in mind, small hooks. The biggest things with failure in trout fishing, or not finding success. Let's say you're getting bites, but you're not having hookup success, or you're not getting bites to begin with. More often than not, it's not a matter of you're in the wrong spot, or there aren't fish, or the weather's bad, or those factors can be at play, but they are typically not what the major factors for success in trout fishing is. And that is just small hooks, using the appropriate amount of bait, and then having a tight line with your rod tip. And if you can do those three things, you're going to find success. And then you're going to be able to build on that success, and you're going to be able to tailor your own rig how you best like it. You may find that you like using bullet weights better than casting weights. You might find that you like using the snelled knot or the snelled hook with the snap swivel better than crimping on a split shot on your main line and tying on a hook. So all of these things are accomplishing the same things. You're just kind of dialing it into what you found confidence with, and then how you just keep doubling down on that. And from there, you're just going to expand farther into, both trout fishing and fishing in general. And that's what we're here to help with, is just getting you over whatever, that barrier may be between you joining us on this chat to learn more, and then ultimately finding that success when you are on the water, and how we can best help you get there. So if anybody ever has any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'm here to help. Otherwise, thank you for joining us at 1 o'clock. If you didn't sign up, but you got time, come back to our YouTube channel at 1 o'clock, and we'll be doing an hour presentation on artificial lures fishing for trout. So thanks for joining us. Have a great day. We'll see you next time.